From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hello, everyone. My name is Glenda Rawasa, and I work in the financial systems of the Office of the Chief Financial Officer at the Library of Congress. Our office is the technical team responsible for implementing, administering, supporting the financial applications at the library. In other words, we're not some of the cool people. But today it is my great pleasure to introduce our next author, Dan Wells. He represents a variety of genres, including science fiction, dark humor, and supernatural thriller. Mr. Wells has been nominated for both the Hugo and the Campbell Award and has won 2 Parsec Awards for his podcast, Writing Excuses. He is the author of the Partial series and the John Cleaver series, which stars a teenage sociopath. According to his website, thedanwells.com, the John Cleaver series incorporated true crime and a main character who shares Mr. Wells' self-proclaimed obsession with serial killers. His new book is The Devil's Only Friend and is the latest in the John Cleaver series. This book is available in the book sales shop on the lower level, where you can also come to his book signing from 6:30 to 7:30. Without any further delay, please join me in welcoming Dan Wells.
Thank you very much. I have my book here. All right, so my name is Dan Wells, as has been made clear already. My first book is called I Am Not a Serial Killer, and it's an autobiography. We usually get a bigger laugh with that line. Let's try it again. My first book is called I Am Not a Serial Killer, and it's a self-help book. There we go. Okay, so I am very happy to be here. I want to tell you, and this start of this story sounds like I'm very arrogant. There's a lot of conventions, book conventions specifically, going on this weekend. The first one that I was signed up for was actually Dragon Con, which is down in Atlanta. Yeah, there's someone who's sad he's not at Dragon Con. So I have a baby who is due 1 week from tomorrow on September 13th, and so we decided, okay, we're going to back out of Dragon Con. And then we got invitations from all these other conventions. We're like, no, sorry, that's a week before the baby's due. So I've just been kind of saying no to everything. And then we got this invitation here. And I said, no, I'm sorry, that sounds awesome. And my wife's like, you idiot. That's the National Book Festival. You need to go. And so we said yes. But we told the publisher, make it as fast as a trip as possible. Like, I want to be in and out because I don't want to miss the baby if the baby comes. And I'm from Utah, so this is not like baby 1, this is baby 6. So we've done this before. We've been through this process. And so, 6 children is not a huge sample size, but we are able to look back at 100% of our own children and know they tend to come just about 3 days early, 2 to 3 days early, with startling consistency. So we figured we were safe. So I got in like at midnight last night. I will be in D.C. for a total of about 33 hours. I told my wife I'm not even going to pack like a bunch of stuff. I just throw an extra shirt and an extra pair of underwear in my backpack, and that'll be it. And she said, well, you have to take a pair of pants. And because what if you poop your pants? Like, that was the first thing. It's not like, what if someone spills something on your pants? No, the first thing she went to was me pooping my pants. So I don't know what that tells you. It probably tells you that we have 5 kids at home, is what that tells you. And so she's got that on her mind. So anyway, I'm here for this brief window of 33 hours. 8-9 days before the baby's supposed to come. So, of course, she came this morning. I am now the father of 6 children instead of 5. And I saw the whole thing on FaceTime in my hotel room. And it was awesome. So there you go. But So that's my story. We don't have a name yet, so whoever cheers the loudest, I'll name my baby after you, I guess. There we go. Okay. No, I'm campaigning very heavily for Riley, but I would spell it like the Cthulhu way, with like an apostrophe and all these extra letters that don't make sense. And my wife is not going to go for that, so we're going to end up with a normal name. Although all of my children, their middle name starts with D, and so I'm kind of campaigning at this point for DC as a middle name, which would be great. And then someone on Facebook suggested first name could be Marvel, and then we'd have everything covered, and it would be fantastic. Anyway, I'm not actually going to talk about pooping my pants and having babies the entire hour, so don't worry about that. There is another 15 minutes or so of that to go. Just kidding. So, I am ostensibly here to talk to you guys about mysteries and thrillers, and in particular about this one, which is called The Devil's Only Friend, which is a brand new book. It is the fourth book in the John Cleaver series, which always kind of puts people off because they're like, well, I haven't read the first three. I'm going to be lost. No. If you read the third one, you'd be totally lost. But I started this one essentially as a second trilogy. And I'll get to that in a minute. I say that up front so you can make your purchase plans now, because you totally want to read this book and you won't be lost. You'll spoil everything that happened in the first three, but you won't be lost because it's designed to be read first. Anyway, what I want to talk about first is I want to ask you guys a question. How many people did Luke Skywalker kill? Okay? Think about that. Not just like, the random faceless stormtroopers that he killed one by one. What about when he blew up the Death Star in what was, from the Empire's point of view, the most devastating terrorist attack they had ever seen? I mean, that thing was the size of a small moon, and they didn't just live on the surface of it, they filled the entire volume. There's a lot of people on that thing. Luke Skywalker is one of the greatest heroes of our culture, and he killed, what are we going to estimate on that? 6 figures at least, right? That's amazing. My first book, I Am Not a Serial Killer, is about a teenage boy who kills one person. And yet Luke Skywalker is a hero in an action kids show, and my book is a horror novel. And the difference there, I think, is fascinating. Obviously, a lot of that has to do with how that death is handled, right? I mean, if the person that John Cleaver, the character in my book, if he killed someone wearing a stormtrooper helmet, we'd probably be pretty cool with that, right? Or if he just blew up something that the person happened to be in, then we'd be cool with that too. But I think a big part of that reason is because in mystery fiction, in thriller fiction, in horror fiction, we are not looking at how somebody dies so much as we are looking at why. And so we have, all of the superhero movies that are coming out. We have all of these exciting action movies. We have stories where, a warrior will charge through a horde of orcs and kill like 100 of them in a single scene, and we're like, yeah, that's awesome. But when we slow down and we take the stormtrooper helmet off and we take the time to really look at the person who's dying and to agonize over that decision, it's not just, well, he or she is bad and therefore they're going to die on the way to doing something more important. We actually think about it and we think, well, yeah, they are really bad, but so is killing. And so I don't know what to do. John Cleaver is a sociopath. What sociopath means, sociopathy is a form of psychopathy, which is a large umbrella of mental illness that basically covers your brain doesn't work right, which is kind of cheating to say because that's what most mental illness is. Sociopathy specifically, as classically defined, is a lack of empathy. Okay? That means that if someone is a sociopath, they don't perceive other people as being the same as they are. So if I were a sociopath, wink, wink, I would look out at all of you, and I would not perceive we are all a group of human beings together. It would be that you are somehow inherently different from me. And some of the sociopaths in history would consider that you're all worse, that you're all bugs, or some of them would look at you and say you're all better than me and I'm the bug. But the key component there is that they're different. I made John Cleaver a teenager specifically because I think a lack of empathy, and this is going to sound bad, but let me finish, is inherently adolescent. Someone who doesn't have empathy looks at the rest of the world and thinks, why are they doing that? Why are they reacting that way? Why is that one person sad? Why are those people mad at me? Because imagine that we all have like a radio receiver that broadcasts and receives emotions all the time, and that is a huge part, in fact, I would say for most of us, the primary part of how we communicate with each other, which is why it's so hard to hold any kind of meaningful conversation on the internet, because we're not picking up those cues of sarcasm or whatever other emotional vibe is being given off by that radio. Someone with sociopathy doesn't get any of those clues even in a normal conversation, and so they see you crying or angry or happy, and they think, that's weird. I wonder why that person is crying or angry or happy. I don't understand why you do what you do. And I remember as a teenager, that's what a lot of us went through, right? Trying to figure it out. Well, why is the world the way it is? Why are those people doing that? Where do I fit in? Why do I feel so different from everybody else? And so this character of a teenage sociopath kind of wrote itself. And this always sounds weird when I say this, because I started off as a writer trying to write fantasy novels, and I wrote 5 of them, and then finally said, you know what? I'm going to write something dark. I'm going to write a horror novel. And it felt like coming home, right? We've all felt that. All well-adjusted people read about serial killers for fun. You guys agree with me on this. And so writing from the point of view of this sociopathic proto-serial killer in a horror novel, it felt very comfortable. It felt like coming home. And part of that is because, like I said, we can all, even though he can't empathize with us, we can all empathize with that situation. We can all look at that and think, well, yeah, I've felt left out before, and I've felt confused before, and I've felt, unreasonable hatred at some moron before, especially, as I mentioned earlier, the internet. So I sat down to write this series, and because I really wanted to play that angle of it, the person who feels like they are not a part of the rest of the world, I made this a supernatural book as well. It's a supernatural thriller, a horror novel. And if you want to have a really fun read sometime, go on Amazon and read the 1-star reviews of I Am Not a Serial Killer. It's great. And the problem most of them had with it is that they didn't realize when they started that it was a paranormal novel. And so you get through, and it's interesting to me, just as a sociological experiment, to see at what point people realize, oh, this has got monsters in it. Because the people who read science fiction, fantasy all the time, they can tell from the first chapter. They're like, oh, yeah, there's monsters in this book. Whereas the true crime people who, my apologies, picked this up thinking it was a true crime novel, when the monster shows up in chapter 7, they're like, what the hell just happened to this book? And they get really mad. And their tears are delicious to me. It was wonderful. And so I wanted to make it supernatural, though, very specifically in order to underline this difference, this idea that someone with sociopathy feels disconnected from everybody else. And so at the core of that first book, we have a boy who does not feel connected to the rest of the human race against, his foil is a monster who is literally not a part of the human race and yet is more connected to us than our hero is. And he is, while he is awful, he is in some ways much more identifiable. We can understand why he's doing what he's doing. John can't. John just thinks he's a monster and can't figure out what's going on. And I love that. And this is the part where I get to brag a little bit. Just in March, all of March and the first couple weeks of April, so 6 weeks, we just filmed a movie of this book, which I'm very excited about. And yes, thank you very much. The monster, and I'm being very vague about this because I don't want to spoil who the monster is, except I'm about to, because you're going to know it's an old man. It's Christopher Lloyd. Yeah, see, now all the rest of you didn't clap the first time. You wish you'd clap now because you're like, whoa, Christopher Lloyd. The kid is played by Max Records, who, if you've seen the live action Where the Wild Things Are, he was the kid in Where the Wild Things Are, and he's amazing. And then our old man is Christopher Lloyd. And before I get too far into this story, I have to tell you, we spent like 5 years trying to raise the money to make this movie. It's not, I keep talking about me. It's the movie studio that's been doing all this, and I feel connected to them because it's my baby. I mean, not my actual one of those babies. It's a different baby. So you go to a Hollywood producer, you go to a studio, and you say, hey, we want to make this great movie, and the two main characters are a 15-year-old boy and a 75-year-old man, and they laugh at you because there's no role for Brad Pitt in your movie, so why are you even asking for money, you moron? There is a very weird attitude about what can sell and what can't in movies, which is why I'm delighted to be writing books instead. But we got Christopher Lloyd, who was one of our first picks anyway, and who was amazing, and who you all said, oh, he'd be really good. Yeah, but Hollywood producers still don't think he can headline a movie because he's not Brad Pitt. So anyway, we got him, and he and Max together show this relationship so brilliantly of two people. Neither of them are really good people, and neither of them are really evil people. I mean, if we're going to define evil as doing something wrong because it's wrong, then they're not evil people either. They're doing bad things, but they both kind of have good reasons, I guess. I don't know. I'll leave that to your interpretation. But it was fascinating for me to be able to watch that relationship develop between those two actors after I'd already been writing like 4 other books on it. So let me talk a little bit about the books themselves. The first one, I Am Not a Serial Killer, is this story that I'm talking about. Little kid, 15-year-old kid. His family runs the mortuary, so he's kind of surrounded by death already, and gets embroiled in this thing. At first, he thinks it's a serial killer in town. And to be fair, all those 1-star reviewers, at first, they thought it was a serial killer in town too. But he realizes at some point that it's a monster. This horrible monster who is killing people and stealing body parts from them. And he doesn't know why, but he does know that that's wrong. He does not feel in his heart that it is wrong because he's a sociopath. But he knows objectively that it is wrong. And so he wants to stop it. And that is when we get in. That's why I bring up the whole question about Luke Skywalker, because at that point, and we're about 50% into the book at this point, John Cleaver has to make a decision. This person is doing something bad. The only way to stop him is for me to kill him. He's tried other things. He's tried appealing to the authorities by this point in the book, and that went very wrong. So the only option left to him is to stop this thing himself. And that, for me, is, I don't want to say the most fascinating question of literature, but all of my books are about it in some way or another. How far are you willing to go to do what you know is right? And I think that, in large part, is the question that all of us face as members of a society, right? Every time we go to the airport and we have to take off our shoes for the stupid thing and the TSA and all this stuff, well, how far are you willing to go to do what you know is right? Where is the line between safety and security? Where is the line between pacifism, and self-defense. Where are those lines? How can we possibly find them? And so that's what John Cleaver in this book series is trying to find. And he spends the second half of that book trying to decide if it's okay. Here's a monster killing people. If I kill it, it will stop. But then the town will still have a killer in it because I will have become one. Does that make it okay? I find that to be an incredibly interesting question. And so much more interesting than, can I blow up the Death Star in time, you know? Even though only one person is dying, we are spending so much more time focusing on how and why. Not so much how, but why. You know, and is it okay? And asking those very difficult moral questions. I remember reading somewhere years ago, Wes Craven, who just recently passed away, he said that horror films, and keep in mind he just did kind of slasher films, not even like the brainy horror films, but just sex and teenagers dying, that horror films are the most moral genre of cinema. And I think that is really interesting. And it's not because it is an inherently moral or uplifting thing, but that it is primarily concerned with morality. Not just all the bad guys, you can tell they're bad guys because they're wearing stormtrooper helmets, but who are the bad guys and how can we stop them without also becoming bad guys ourselves? Our society right now, I think, is dealing with that question more than we ever have before. And you can watch the way that our society, that our art is reflecting the questions that we are asking ourselves. And a fascinating, fantastic illustration of this would be something like the Battlestar Galactica franchise. The first one that came out in the 70s, in the early 80s, that was, we are good, and the bad guys are all faceless pseudo-stormtroopers. And just to really hit home the communist angle, their ships were all flown by 3 pilots working in perfect unison with each other. And that's who we were afraid of. And then more recently, 10 years ago, we got the new Battlestar Galactica, in which we couldn't tell who the bad guys were. And the Cylons looked exactly like us. And sometimes they were good, and sometimes the people were really bad. And so we continue to struggle with those, and that's kind of what we're dealing with now. You know, we're no longer in the middle of the Cold War fighting the faceless Cylon enemy. We're fighting against terrorists. You know, we're struggling against this much more convoluted, complicated kind of world environment where we live, and we can't tell all the time who is bad and are we good or not. I remember, and I'm getting very political here, and I'll get back to the funny stuff again, don't worry. But I remember when Snowden came out, Edward Snowden came out with his leaks and went to Russia of all places. And everyone was like, well, why? You know, first of all, whether you agree with him or not, I think it's fascinating that he decided that Russia was a safer place for him to be to escape a surveillance state. And when you look at what we are doing right now, America in 2015 puts the Soviet Union surveillance system to shame. We are so much more invasive and pervasive and better at it than they ever were. And we could make arguments, which I'm not going to make, about whether that is justified or not. But the fact that we are asking those questions, I think, is the important part. The fact that we are looking at the world we live in and trying to decide where those lines are between who is a good guy and who is a bad guy, and what happens if we cross it. So, I want to pause right now and open this up to questions. And they don't have to be like deeply philosophical questions, now that I've got us all thinking about that. In fact, I would prefer that they were all just frivolous, useless questions that will make everyone laugh. So I am going to very quickly run down some other quick things about the rest of my books, and then I'm going to open this up for questions, and somebody has to be first, so it may as well be you, so don't be shy and raise your hand, and then I'll answer questions. So, as I said, this is the 4th book in the John Cleaver series. It is the start of a new trilogy. So there's a new one coming next year, and then the final, I say final, number 6 will be coming in 2017, and I don't know what that one's called yet. The one coming next year is called Over Your Dead Body, which my German editor named. These books, the John Cleaver series is actually much more popular in Europe than it is in the US, and I don't know why that is. It says something interesting about something, probably. So I wrote the first 3, and then, finished them like 6 years ago and was done, and figured I wouldn't write any more John Cleaver stuff. And then, while I actually was living in Germany for 2 years, I moved back to the States 1 year ago. And while I was living in Germany, came up with this interesting idea for more John Cleaver stories. So I sent an email to my German editor and said, would you be interested in more, like a new trilogy of John Cleaver stuff? And his response to me was to send the cover he had already mocked up. And I said, that's great. I haven't even written it yet. How does it have a title already? And he said, well, it's because your titles are always dumb and I change them. So I couldn't think of a title for the 5th one, and eventually I just said, Karsten, can you give me a good title? And he said, we're going to call it Over Your Dead Body. I'm like, that's great. We're stealing it. Thank you very much. So that's what the English one is going to be called as well. So those are the horror books I do, the supernatural thriller whatevers. I also have another one called The Hollow City, which is a standalone thriller about a man with schizophrenia. Because I find mental illness to be really fascinating and important, and I can talk about that for like another 3 hours if someone wants to ask a question. Those are from Tor Books. I also publish young adult science fiction with HarperCollins, and the first series from them is called Partials. Partials, Fragments, and Ruins are the 3 books, and they are also sneaky, underhanded about this same theme of how far are you willing to go to do what you know is right. And because it is post-apocalyptic, I think that you can play out those same concerns and ask those same questions on a much bigger scale. So instead of one kid hiding in a town killing monsters, you've got, a couple thousand people blowing up bridges in Manhattan, but still, about the same thing. Because if the extinction of the entire human race is on the line, like if that's what you're fighting for, then a lot of things that you would never consider doing in any other circumstances might be the only way. In fact, it might be the only moral response to that situation is to do something terrible in order to save everybody, right? So anyway, I love those kinds of questions. The next series that I have coming out from HarperCollins, which starts next year, is called Mirador. It is much less heady, let's say that. It's a cyberpunk adventure, basically. It's me kind of doing Veronica Mars in 2050 LA with girls who play video games professionally. So that one still has some deep questions in it, but mostly it's just I wanted to blow some stuff up without having to feel all imperious about it. So anyway, that's my less pretentious book series. Yeah, so it's question time. Raise your hands or come. There's microphones here. Ask a question, sir.
Hi. My question really is about what you said. I think lately there's been, probably in the last 20 years, this fascination with charming sociopaths. I mean, people would love to have a conversation with Hannibal Lecter as long as he was on the other side of the room. But in reality, I think there's some of that comes from the real world. I mean, everyone knows that William Calley did what he did in our name, and he was convicted of murdering 22 people, far more than Charlie Manson, who is considered a monster. But William Calley ended up owning a store, getting a pardon, and owning a store in Georgia, including the 22 people he personally killed. One of them was a 4-year-old boy. So, Well, I guess my question is
Yeah.
this growing fascination with charming sociopaths?
I think, first of all, that, first, you're absolutely right. And we can look at Hannibal Lecter, and we can look at the most recent incarnation of Sherlock Holmes. We can look at all of these other examples. We love charming sociopaths. Dr. House, Dr. Becker, which was the funny precursor to Dr. House. Like, we love charming sociopaths. And I would say that a big part of that, I won't answer this decisively, but I think a big part of that is the same reason that we are also fascinated with vampires, the same reason that we are also fascinated with monsters, the same monsters that used to be the bad guys in modern literature and in modern art. We're seeing them as the heroes and the love interests. Even zombies are love interests at this point. And it is because I think, and maybe this is just because I've been harping on the same subject for an hour, I think that it goes back to that same question, that same shift in national concern and corresponding shift in national identity that we have seen. So like what I was talking about with Battlestar Galactica, in the 70s and 80s, we saw ourselves as the heroes fighting a monolithic and inherently evil enemy. And in the 90s and the aughts and the teens, I guess is what we are in now, we don't see ourselves that way anymore. We as a culture see ourselves as a flawed and damaged society. Look at movies from 20 years ago, and you will rarely ever see the bombs actually going off, because the stories we told were about heroes who stopped the bombs from going off. And what you see in movies now is the bombs going off all the time. It's getting to the point that we are tired of it. That when a movie like Man of Steel comes out and they destroy a city at the end of it, we're like, oh, another city destroyed? Really? And it's because today we're in a society where the bombs do go off. Maybe it's because of 9/11, maybe it's because of something else. But we are no longer trying to prevent disasters, we're trying to survive them. And I think, to bring this back to your question, that our fascination with charming sociopaths is part of that same thing, because we are seeing ourselves in a more monstrous role now than we ever did before, and so we're allowing those kinds of people to be more than just the antagonist in the stories. I could talk more, but we have more questions here, please.
Congratulations on being a father again.
Oh, thank you very much.
How do you balance the family and the writing, since you kind of dwelled into a kind of a dark subject, and I know children are kind of like a light subject? So how do you make that balance for you?
Well, having 6 children, I don't know if that's a light subject. That's a pretty horrific all around. My mother-in-law, who is right now with my wife, she was there for the birth and everything. She, when she read the manuscript for the second John Cleaver book, which is called Mr. Monster, and it is by far the darkest of the series, she read that and she called my wife and said, "Do you feel safe at home? Are my grandchildren okay?" Like, she was really concerned that I was some kind of closet murderer, or, in some other part of the house. But she was, yes, I guess, is the general answer, that it does seem very strange to write about these super dark things while also having children in the home. But I remember several years ago, Neil Gaiman was on the Colbert Report, and he was talking about The Graveyard Book, which was his new book at the time. So that makes this, 4 years ago, 5 years ago? And Colbert asked him, "Why is your book so dark? Why are you telling, this is supposed to be a children's story, and yet the very first sentence is, 'The hand in the darkness held a knife,' or some version of that. I don't remember exactly what it was." And then Colbert said, "Whatever happened to nice, happy stories like Peter Rabbit?" And Neil Gaiman, gave some kind of nice answer to this that deflected the question and talked about the importance of darkness or whatever. And meanwhile, I at home was screaming at the TV, "Colbert, you moron, have you ever read Peter Rabbit?" It is about a child of a broken home who breaks into his neighbor's yard to steal his stuff, and then the neighbor tries to kill him and eat him. That's some dark stuff. The history of literature, and of children's literature in particular, is inherently dark. That's where Grimm's fairy tales come from. That's where all of this nasty stuff comes from. And I don't think... Okay, let's get back then to Neil Gaiman. His actual answer, one of the things he said, was that adults will always ask him why his stuff is so dark, or they'll complain that his stuff is too dark for children. And his answer to that was, he has never had that complaint from a child. I think we need to trust children more. Not that we need to throw them into, pits full of snakes or anything, but that we need to trust them, that they can police themselves and their reading and their media a little better, that they can handle darker stuff than we think that they can. And personally, I think the single greatest thing about reading is our ability to read something we're not supposed to. So, next question.
Hi, I'm in a book club, and we read very eclectic things, from Where the Red Fern Grows to In Cold Blood. Which of your books would you suggest for a book club?
Ooh.
Because we like to discuss it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Which of my books would I suggest? That is going to be tricky.
No.
All of them. No. If you can only read one...
Well, because,
Yeah, so for a book club, I would recommend either The Hollow City...
videotape it, okay?
Okay, either The Hollow City, because that's a standalone, and that is about schizophrenia, and it's about trying to figure out what is real and what is not. But I think that an interesting discussion could be had for a book group on any of the first in a series. Partials, possibly. If you tend more towards something like In Cold Blood, then absolutely try Devil's Only Friend, or I Am Not a Serial Killer. If I had to pick one, then I'd say The Devil's Only Friend, because it's the brand new one. So there you go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we are low on time, so I'm going to answer these questions faster and less charmingly.
Hi, you talk about monsters, and when normal people hear monsters, they think vampires, they think werewolves, they think mummies. So I'm guessing, why in your books do you choose the specific monster category of demons as your monsters?
Okay, that is a great question, because the answer to it is probably not what you're expecting. I chose the word demon not because my monsters are demonic in any classical religious sense, but because my main character, John Cleaver, is obsessed with serial killers, and that's what the son of Sam called his monsters. He was convinced that there were demons, either his neighbor or his neighbor's dog, depending on the account and the point in time at which he gave the account, were commanding him and forcing him to kill. And so John Cleaver thought that was a great word, and he borrowed it. And I thought it was a great word too. So there's nothing specifically religious. And the movie director and the movie's art designer were really mad at me for using the word demon, because it implies this kind of red thing and horns and a tail and everything, and they're like, that's not what we want them to look like. And I said, good, because they don't. And he said, but that's what everyone's going to think. So I apologize, I guess, but they're not real demons. So, new question.
This question comes from you returning to the John Cleaver series. When I was 18, my first play was produced. And 15 years after that, a producer came to me and said, hey, I want to take this play up again, but you've got to do some rewrites because it's been 15 years. And trying to get into the heads of those characters 15 years after my 18-year-old reality was really tough. So what challenges did you face in returning to that world and those characters?
It was hard. Because I finished that first trilogy, those first 3 books, like I said, 5 or 6 years ago, and then started the new one. And I had considered it finished I thought that it concluded. And most specifically, I thought that the character of John Cleaver had a really solid arc. He progressed from A to B in what was, to me, a very satisfying conclusion. It wasn't necessarily a happy ending, because it's a horror novel. And so bad things happen to good people and everyone's sad, but it was satisfying at the end. He had changed in some important way. And so the main problem for me trying to pick this up in a new series about the same guy was, how can I be true to the changes he has gone through while still keeping him the same creepy weirdo that we liked in the first trilogy? And that's really kind of the problem with any sequel, right? Is that you have to be the same enough so that the people who liked the first one will like the second one, but you also have to be different enough so that people will just, they won't feel like they've wasted their time and they should have just read the first one again. For me, it was finding a new thing for him to be concerned about. And, you can find all kinds of examples in our media and TV shows and such where, a character's character, their entire existence was defined around a single question. Like in Moonlighting, are these two characters going to sleep together? When they finally did, well, we don't have any more stories to tell because that's who they were, and they're not that anymore. In Star Trek The Next Generation, will Data ever get emotions? Eventually he does, and then he becomes like the worst character in the series because they're done. They don't have any more questions to ask about that person. And you can compare that, I think, very valuably with, for example, the cast of Buffy, in which those characters had those same kind of defining questions. Will this person do this? Yes, they will, at the end of like season 2. But then they're more than that. Their characters are bigger than that. And so there's still more questions to ask. So what I had to do with John Cleaver is just figure out, well, what else is he concerned with? Who is he in addition to this first question we've already answered? And once I figured out that, then I could ask new questions and tell new things. Yes?
How did you gain confidence in your writing skill?
How do I gain confidence in my writing skill? I don't know if I have a really good answer to that. Someone asked me this question in Germany when I was there. I went to talk to a book club, and someone asked that exact thing, like, how could you dare be confident enough to write a series about a sociopath who's inherently unlikable? Like, I wouldn't dare do that. I wouldn't be confident enough to do it. And the only thing I could think of at the time, and this sounds bad when I say it, and I want you to know, I'm American and white and male. I've got like this kind of self-assuredness beaten into me from birth. I feel like I can do anything. And that sounds awful, and I know, and I'm sorry. And so the reason that I mention that is because I don't know if I have good answers to give to anyone else on that question. Because I've always, my mom always teases me about being self-confident is her code word for you arrogant little twerp, because I've always been like this my whole life. So if I could give useful advice on the question, how do you gain confidence in your own writing? Practice. I mean, that sounds terrible. The most boring and yet the most true and helpful advice on any question about writing is do it enough and you'll get good at it. And that's the same thing with confidence, Write something and then force yourself to let someone read it. Write something you would never dare write and then hide it. Just always be pushing your own comfort levels, and just like any muscle, that confidence muscle is going to eventually bulk up. Last question, and then they're going to kick me out.
And in the end of Peter Rabbit is killed and eaten.
Yeah. Sleep well tonight, everyone. So I've got 1 minute left? 2 minutes? No time whatsoever. I have a signing downstairs in 15 minutes at 6:30. I hope you can all come say hi, and thank you very much for coming. You're wonderful.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.